This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. The red glow of the descent light bathed the cabin in an eerie hue. Evelyn, a seasoned flight attendant with a smile that could calm the most panicked flyer, finished her pre-landing checks. Flight 317 from London to New York was a routine red-eye, the kind where most passengers were either catching up on sleep or desperately trying to numb themselves with airplane wine. Suddenly, a jolt rocked the plane. The fastened seatbelt sign illuminated, momentarily bathing the cabin in a harsh white light. A murmur of unease rippled through the passengers. Evelyn grabbed the nearest armrest, her practiced smile faltering for a moment. This wasn't normal turbulence. The plane lurched again, this time more violently. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. Panic erupted. Evelyn sprang into action, barking out safety instructions, her voice rising above the cacophony of screams. In the flickering overhead lights, she caught a glimpse of a figure moving furtively in first class. It was a man she vaguely recognized, a businessman who always flew this route and tipped generously. But something about his demeanor now felt off. The plane righted itself just as abruptly as it had dipped, leaving behind a trail of shaken passengers and a lingering sense of unease. As the captain announced a safe landing at a diverted airport, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister had unfolded amidst the chaos. The businessman was gone from his seat, vanished like a ghost. A niggling curiosity gnawed at Evelyn. What had he been doing in first class during the turbulence? The chaos on the ground at the diverted airport in Halifax, Nova Scotia, was a stark contrast to the tense calm on board. Passengers shuffled around, bewildered and frustrated. Evelyn, however, couldn't let the diversion distract her. The missing businessman, Mr. Thorne, gnawed at her. Using the passenger manifest, she discreetly noted down his contact details. Later, after the frustrated passengers were finally settled in a nearby hotel, Evelyn found a quiet corner and discreetly called the number. It went straight to voicemail. Frustrated, she decided to use the hotel's internet to search for Thorne. News articles revealed nothing unusual about him. He was a successful CEO of a tech company, known for his frequent business trips across the Atlantic. Searching social media proved equally fruitless. Thorne maintained a meticulously curated online presence, devoid of anything personal. Evelyn reached out to her friend, Mark, a detective back in New York with whom she'd occasionally shared leads from suspicious activities witnessed on board. He was skeptical. "Missing a guy on a bumpy flight isn't exactly groundbreaking, Ev," he said with a chuckle. But Evelyn's persistence, fueled by a hunch she couldn't explain, eventually wore him down. He promised to look into Mr. Thorne, albeit with a hint of amusement. Meanwhile, back at the hotel, Evelyn bumped into a fellow flight attendant, Sarah, who had also been on Flight 317. Sarah, known for her bubbly personality, seemed unusually subdued. Evelyn confided in her about Mr. Thorne's disappearance and the unsettling feeling it gave her. To her surprise, Sarah's eyes widened. "Mr. Thorne? He almost bumped into me in the first-class galley during the turbulence. He looked like a man possessed, muttering something about needing to get off the plane." This new information fueled Evelyn's determination. If Mr. Thorne truly meant to get off the plane, why vanish after the landing? The next morning, after a restless night spent piecing together the puzzle, Evelyn decided to explore the plane. Maintenance crews were swarming the aircraft, but she managed to slip past them and enter the first-class galley. A wave of nausea washed over her. There, on the stainless steel counter, amidst the discarded coffee cups and crumpled napkins, lay a small, blood-stained cloth. Panic clawed at her throat. This wasn't just a missing passenger anymore. This was a crime scene. But before she could react, a gruff voice boomed behind her, "What are you doing here?" She whirled around to find a burly mechanic staring at her with suspicion. Evelyn stammered, trying to explain her presence. The mechanic, unconvinced, threatened to call security. Desperate, she blurted out about the blood-stained cloth, hoping it might buy her some time. The mention of blood changed the mechanic's demeanor. He ushered her out of the galley, his gruffness replaced by a concerned frown. He confirmed Evelyn's suspicion. They'd found the cloth during their initial inspection, but it hadn't been deemed important enough to report immediately. Evelyn pressed him for more information, but he could tell her little. He suggested she speak to the lead investigator, a gruff, old-school detective by the name of Miller. Detective Miller, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with a scowl, wasn't impressed by Evelyn's story. He dismissed her as an overenthusiastic flight attendant with a vivid imagination. The blood-stained cloth, he explained, could be anything, a nosebleed, a shaving accident. However, Evelyn's persistence eventually cracked his gruff exterior. He grudgingly agreed to look into Mr. Thorne's background, his skepticism evident. Back at the hotel, Evelyn received a call from Mark. His investigation had yielded some interesting results. Mr. Thorne's company was facing a hostile takeover, and a large sum of money was missing from their accounts. The missing money, according to Mark, could be linked to a notorious arms dealer with a presence in Halifax. The pieces were starting to fall into place. The businessman, the turbulence, the desperate need to get off the plane, it all pointed to Mr. Thorne being involved in something nefarious. But what exactly, and what role, if any, did the turbulence play? Evelyn shared Mark's findings with Sarah. Sarah's eyes widened at Evelyn's revelation. Arms dealer? That explains it, she exclaimed, her voice barely a whisper. Remember the weird package Mr. Thorne almost dropped in the galley right before the turbulence hit? A jolt of memory shot through Evelyn. Yes, she vaguely recalled Sarah mentioning a frantic Mr. Thorne fumbling with a package during the chaos. But in the adrenaline-fueled moment, she hadn't paid much attention. What did the package look like? She pressed, her heart pounding. It was wrapped in brown paper, secured with thick twine. It slipped from his grasp and almost hit the floor, but he managed to catch it at the last second. He looked terrified, shoving it back into his briefcase like it burned him. Could that package be connected to the missing money and the arms dealer? A growing sense of urgency gripped Evelyn. They had to find Mr. Thorne and that package. But how? They brainstormed throughout the night, exhaustion forgotten in the face of the unfolding mystery. Finally, Sarah came up with an idea. Maybe the hotel staff noticed something unusual about Mr. Thorne. He might have mentioned where he was going, or left something behind in his room. The next morning, armed with Sarah's suggestion and a newfound sense of purpose, Evelyn approached the hotel reception. The receptionist, a friendly woman with a name tag that read Brenda, seemed surprised by their request. But after hearing their story, a flicker of recognition crossed her face. Mr. Thorne? He did seem off, she admitted. He checked in late, barely spoke 2 words, and requested a late checkout for tomorrow. Brenda confirmed that the room hadn't been cleaned yet. With Detective Miller's grudging permission, Evelyn and Sarah cautiously entered Mr. Thorne's room. The air hung heavy with a faint metallic tang. The room was sparsely decorated, offering little insight into Mr. Thorne's personality. However, under the bed, tucked away in a dusty corner, they found a crumpled business card, a name scrawled on it that sent chills down their spines. The name on the business card belonged to Viktor Petrov, a notorious arms dealer with a reputation for ruthlessness. Evelyn's stomach churned. The pieces were clicking into place. Mr. Thorne was likely involved with Petrov, and the package Sarah saw was probably some kind of illegal transaction gone wrong. They needed to warn the authorities, but Detective Miller was still skeptical. Evelyn knew they had to act fast. Reaching out to Mark, she relayed their findings, hoping he could use his resources to put pressure on Detective Miller. Meanwhile, Sarah, unnerved by the whole ordeal, decided to stay behind at the hotel. Evelyn, however, couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Thorne might still be alive. She convinced Brenda, the sympathetic receptionist, to let her take a peek at the security footage from the night of the flight's diversion. Hours blurred as Evelyn scanned through the footage, fast-forwarding through the night. Finally, in the dead of night, she spotted a figure leaving the hotel through a back door, carrying a limping figure over his shoulder. The figure, unmistakably Mr. Thorne, was unconscious, a trail of blood marking their escape route. Adrenaline surged through Evelyn. Mr. Thorne was alive, but in grave danger. She rushed to share the footage with Mark, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. The grainy security footage sent a jolt through Mark. "Evelyn, that's huge. This changes everything," he exclaimed. He immediately contacted Detective Miller, the skepticism in the detective's voice finally replaced by a hint of urgency. With the newfound evidence, the authorities sprang into action. Evelyn, however, couldn't just sit back and wait. The image of Mr. Thorne, limp and bleeding, haunted her. She yearned to help, to be part of the solution, not just a bystander. Ignoring Mark's warnings about staying out of it, she decided to follow the trail left behind by the security footage. The back alley where Mr. Thorne was last seen led to a maze of deserted warehouses on the Halifax waterfront. The wind howled eerily, carrying the salty tang of the harbor. Evelyn, her heart hammering in her chest, crept cautiously through the shadows, her phone clutched in her hand, a silent prayer on her lips. Suddenly, a muffled groan pierced the silence. Evelyn froze, her breath catching in her throat. Following the sound, she stumbled upon a dilapidated warehouse, its windows boarded shut. Hesitantly, she pushed on a rusty door, the sound echoing through the stillness. The warehouse was shrouded in darkness, the air thick with dust and the metallic tang of blood. Evelyn fumbled for her phone, using its flashlight to navigate the cavernous space. In the distance, she spotted a figure slumped against a stack of crates, Mr. Thorne. Relief washed over her, quickly replaced by a surge of fear as she noticed a dark figure looming over him, a glint of metal catching the faint light from her phone. It was Viktor Petrov. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She screamed, the sound echoing through the warehouse, momentarily distracting Petrov. He whirled around, his face contorted in rage. In that split second, Evelyn lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. A struggle ensued, a desperate dance in the darkness. Evelyn, fueled by adrenaline, managed to grab a metal pipe leaning against the crates. With a primal yell, she swung it at Petrov, connecting with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the floor, groaning in pain. Rushing to Mr. Thorne's side, she found him weak but conscious. He explained, in a raspy voice, that Petrov had forced him to participate in the illegal arms deal, threatening to kill him if he refused. The turbulence during the flight, Mr. Thorne revealed, was no coincidence. It was caused by Petrov's men tampering with the plane's controls, a desperate attempt to get the package, the incriminating evidence, off the plane without anyone noticing. Moments later, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Mark, alerted by Evelyn's frantic call after she entered the warehouse, had contacted the authorities. Relief flooded Evelyn as she helped Mr. Thorne to his feet, the warehouse doors bursting open to reveal a swarm of police officers. The aftermath was a blur of activity. Petrov was arrested, his face a mask of fury as he was hauled away by the police. Mr. Thorne, battered but alive, was taken to the hospital for treatment. Evelyn, exhausted but exhilarated, recounted the events to Detective Miller, who finally acknowledged her role in cracking the case. News of the foiled arms deal and the heroic flight attendant spread like wildfire. Evelyn, initially hesitant about the unwanted spotlight, found herself hailed as a hero. She received awards and commendations, but the most rewarding recognition was the gratitude in Mr. Thorne's eyes when he visited her, fully recovered, to express his thanks. However, the experience left an indelible mark on Evelyn. The thrill of the chase was overshadowed by the realization of the dark underbelly of the world she traversed daily. She returned to her job as a flight attendant, but now, a newfound vigilance simmered beneath her professional smile. The world, she knew, was full of mysteries, some more dangerous than others. And she, the ever-observant flight attendant, would be forever vigilant. Months later, Evelyn found herself back on a flight to London, the familiar hum of the engines a comforting lullaby. As she performed her pre-flight checks, a sense of calm settled over her. The mystery of the missing businessman and the arms dealer had been resolved, the case closed with a neat bow. Yet, a nagging unease lingered beneath the surface. The Halifax incident had irrevocably changed her. The world she traversed daily, once a tapestry of routine and familiar faces, now shimmered with hidden complexities. Every passenger, every business trip, held the potential for a hidden agenda, a story waiting to be unraveled. Looking down the aisle at the settled passengers, Evelyn couldn't help but wonder about their lives, their secrets. Was the businessman in seat 12C truly on a sales pitch, or was there something more to his hurried demeanor? Did the young couple holding hands represent a blossoming romance, or were they running from something darker? A sudden jolt rocked the plane. Passengers stirred, a murmur of unease rippling through the cabin. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. Not turbulence again, she silently pleaded, but the plane dipped again, more violently this time. The fastened seatbelt sign illuminated, bathing the cabin in a harsh white light. Panic flickered in some eyes, but Evelyn took a deep breath, her training kicking in. Her voice, calm and professional, cut through the rising anxiety. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." Her words, practiced and reassuring, brought a semblance of order back to the cabin. As the plane buffeted through the unexpected air currents, Evelyn couldn't help but notice a man in the first-class cabin. He was tall and impeccably dressed, his face obscured by the shadows. A shiver ran down her spine. Was it just the lingering paranoia, or was there something about him that felt off? The turbulence subsided as abruptly as it had begun. Relief washed over the passengers, punctuated by nervous chatter. Evelyn, however, remained on edge. The man in first class continued to occupy her thoughts. He hadn't moved a muscle throughout the turbulence, his presence unsettlingly calm. As Evelyn served beverages, she made a detour towards first class. Reaching his seat, she forced a smile, her eyes lingering on him a second longer than necessary. He met her gaze, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his features. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" she asked politely. "No, thank you," he replied, his voice devoid of warmth. His accent was vaguely European, cultured yet unfamiliar. Evelyn nodded curtly, a sense of unease prickling at her skin. As she turned to leave, he spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "Turbulence is never truly over, is it, miss?" The words sent a jolt through her. Was it a casual observation, or a cryptic message? Evelyn didn't have time to ponder the question. The call light from another passenger buzzed, demanding her attention. Returning to her duties, Evelyn couldn't shake off the encounter. The man's words echoed in her mind, a foreshadowing of something yet to come. The experience in Halifax might have been a closed case, but the reality of hidden dangers and unexpected turbulence on her journeys had become a truth she couldn't ignore. With a determined glint in her eyes, Evelyn continued serving her passengers, a guardian angel with a smile, forever vigilant in the ever-unfolding mystery that was flight.